Good evening. I'm Lynn Flynn, a member of the League of Women Voters, and I'll be serving as the moderator for this forum for primary candidates for the Circuit Court Judge, 22nd Circuit, 4th Division. This is a special election to fill a vacancy. Welcome to our audience here in the Farish Theater at the Lexington Public Library. Our sponsors this evening are the Lexington Public Library and the League of Women Voters of Lexington. This forum will be available to view later by going to the library or league websites. All candidates on the ballot for the Circuit Court Judge were invited this evening and all have agreed to participate. We're following the League of Women Voters policies and procedures for this forum. In order to give the candidates a fair chance to be heard, we have drawn randomly for the order of opening remarks and questions, and then we drew a second time randomly for the order of closing remarks. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to introduce themselves and 90 seconds to respond to each question. Questions have been created by the sponsoring agencies, and then we have also taken questions from the audience and received questions via email. Finally, we'll give each candidate 90 seconds for closing remarks, and we'll use the second drawing for the order of closing comments. So we'll begin with the opening comments, and the candidates will go in the order of the first drawing, and that order is the order that they appear at the table up here. So we'll begin with Mr. Todd Page, next Mr. Tommy Todd, next Ms. Julie Goodman, Mr. Stephen Stadler, and Mr. John Reynolds. So, Mr. Page, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Todd Page. I appreciate everyone being here and taking an interest in this race. I've told several people in the course of my campaigning that I would rather you didn't vote than not vote with an educated mind and not know who the candidates are and who you're voting for and why you're voting for them. So I certainly appreciate you guys being here today. Along those regards, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a lifelong Lexington resident. I've lived here for 53 years. My wife, Sarah, is in the back of the room. We have two children, Hagen, who's 22, and Claire, who's a college freshman at Transy, 18, but close. I'm an attorney at Stahl Keenan Ogden. I've been at Stahl Keenan for most of my career, 27 of my 29 years. I've been a litigator in the circuit courts my entire career. While at Stahl Keenan, I've been an equity partner for most of that time. I'm a lifelong Lexington resident. I grew up in a neighborhood off of Bryan Station Road. I attended high school there, graduated salutatorian in 1983, and from there I went to Transylvania on a full academic scholarship. I graduated from Transy with an English degree, and from there I went to the University of Kentucky College of Law, also on a full academic scholarship, and I graduated UK Law with distinction in 1990. And I'm almost out of time. Since then, I've been an attorney exclusively here in Lexington, and my entire career has focused on litigation, almost exclusively in the circuit courts. Over my career, I've appeared in over 75 circuit courts throughout the Commonwealth and litigating cases in all of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Todd?
Good evening. My name is Tommy Todd, and I'm here for one reason, and that's to do public service for the city of Lexington. In short, I want to pay it forward to my profession and then to my hometown, both of which have been so good to me over my lifetime. Like Todd, I'm also a lifetime resident of Lexington, but for the voters, you need to understand that I think I have the right temperament for the job. People that know me will tell you that I'm calm, I'm steady, I'm fair-minded, and I don't think I get mad very easily. I like to think methodically, and I like to think that I want to get things right and get it right the first time. I've been living here for 58 years. I've been practicing law here for 34 years. I have a very broad experience, not just in litigation, but in transactional work, litigation, arbitration, mediations, and administrative hearings here in Fayette County. I have gained a lot of expertise such that I've been hired as an expert witness 4 times, once by the Kentucky Bar Association. I've been hired as a private mediator 3 times, once by 2 of the largest law firms here in central Kentucky, who both jointly thought I was the right person to help their clients achieve a just resolution on a very difficult dispute. I've signed my name to over $1 billion worth of title policies in the last 20 years. And all that should indicate to you one thing: trust. The clients that know me place a lot of confidence in me, and they know I won't let them down. And if I get elected, I won't let Fayette County down either. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Goodman?
Thank you. I'm Judge Julie Muth Goodman. I also grew up here. I went to Christ the King, then to Tate's Creek, Transylvania on a scholarship, graduated summa cum laude, and then graduated from the University of Kentucky Law School. I would say I am a product of this community and of our excellent educational system. I have been your district court judge for 11 years. I took the bench in 2008, and I've been fortunate enough on 4 different elections to be reelected to that position by the citizens of Lexington and Fayette County. In the last 4 years that I've been on the bench, I have handled a specialty drug court. I think it's very important that we all acknowledge that we have an opiate addiction problem in this community, and the drug court is a specialty court that I handle as a volunteer. In addition to that, before I took the bench, I was a trial lawyer. I've spent my entire career in the courtroom. I started out as a special prosecutor and an assistant Commonwealth attorney with Ray Larson. I've tried capital murder cases. I tried cases in 20 states. After that, I went into private practice and was a litigator in circuit court for the whole 28 years before I took the bench. I've done product liability cases, all complex litigation, and I've been fortunate as a trial lawyer to try cases in 20 states. It would be an honor to serve you, and I thank you all for coming out tonight to listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stadler?
Thank you. My name is Stephen Stadler, and I'm a prosecutor running for the Fayette Circuit Court Judge because I'm committed to continuing to serve this community. First of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and the Lexington Public Library for hosting this event. I've served Fayette County professionally by being a prosecutor and an administrative hearing officer. I've also served as a volunteer on various boards, such as Sunflower Kids and the Lexington Dream Factory. I've also served Fayette County by being a leader on community projects, such as On the Table. Continuing to serve as your next Fayette Circuit Court Judge is the next step in that service for me. My first job out of law school was as a staff attorney for a circuit court judge, and it was at that time I realized my calling within the profession was in the judiciary. I've spent the last 10 years working at the county attorney's office, where I've been in every division from child support enforcement to general prosecution to the representation of elected officials. And the responsibility of a public prosecutor differs from that of a regular advocate or attorney, and that it's not merely to advocate on their behalf, but to seek justice. The most important reason why I'm interested in being your next Fayette Circuit Court Judge is a genuine desire to serve others. I believe a judge should follow the law as written, and every person deserves to be treated with respect in a courtroom. For me, this position is not a new line of work, but rather a continuation of who I am and my career of service to this community. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Lynn, and thanks to the League of Women Voters and Lexington Public Library for putting this on. These are very important events. I'll just tell you briefly about myself because I'm really, frankly, more interested in answering some of your questions and talking about what it means to be a judge in Fayette Circuit Court than reading off my resume to you. But I'm a 97 graduate of the Kentucky College of Law. I'm here with my wife, Holly. We've been married for 24 years. We've raised 2 teenage boys here in Lexington. Before I was appointed to Division III of the Fayette Circuit Court, I was a trial attorney for over 20 years, and I'm your current Circuit Court Judge for Division IV, and I'm the only candidate with Circuit Court experience. In fact, we just finished up a 10-day medical malpractice trial today, so fresh off the bench and looking forward to answering some of the questions tonight.
Thank you very much, and let's go ahead and get directly to the questions. This first question will go to Mr. Todd, who drew second in the drawing. And Mr. Todd, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing our trial judges, and how would you tackle that challenge?
I think that it's already been alluded to. When you go down to circuit court, it's clear that many of the defendants in the criminal division are impaired, either by drugs, by alcohol, by mental problems, education problems, or a combination. Many of the women have been abused. I think that the biggest challenge is not necessarily incarceration. Certainly there's many dangerous individuals that need to be incarcerated, need to be taken off the street, but there's an awful lot of people that go through the circuit court system that need treatment, is what they really need. They need intervention and treatment, because as a society we're going to be better off getting these people back into their families, back into jobs, back into being productive members of society. And that is what I think is the biggest challenge in Fayette Circuit Court, probably most of the trial courts in the United States of America.
Thank you. Ms. Goodman?
I think the greatest challenge in circuit court is the same that we see in district court. Unfortunately, we don't have enough resources to help people who cannot afford attorneys to have attorneys. We are short-handed in both the defense attorneys and in legal aid. I think without that, we have individuals who simply don't get the justice they deserve. As a district court judge, we are constantly trying to find the resources to help those individuals. The other issues we face, and Mr. Todd's addressed it, we end up having to put people who are mentally ill and people who have drug problems in our court system. We use our jails. That's, again, the problem, that we don't have the resources in our communities to help those people. So we end up using our jails, and we end up having the judges how to figure out how to handle those situations and how to get them the resources that they need. So those are, I believe, the two greatest issues as a judge, is making sure that people are getting proper representation and we're helping our mentally ill and our drug people that have drug problems at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Stadler?
I believe the biggest challenge is ensuring that everyone is treated fairly before the court. As a prosecutor, I've seen a number of people, whether based on their race or socioeconomic status, who are not treated the same as everyone else when they're in the court. We have a community in Lexington that's 14% African American, and for the first time in a long time, we are not going to have an African American on the bench. And I think that it is important that the next circuit court judge understands that when people come before the court and understand that the situations that have brought them there. And I believe I would be such a person that would do that. I think it's important to, again, seek justice, make sure that everyone is treated fairly before the court. And I believe my connection with the community would make me uniquely suited in order to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you. So the job of circuit court judge is largely one of criminal justice. So like tomorrow I have 18 civil cases on, probably hear 2 motions, 16 of those are going to be routine. I've got 108 criminal cases on my docket. The balance is you have to look at nonviolent and violent crimes, and you have to treat them differently. Some people say, well, you have to lock up everybody, if they have a drug problem or they've had a couple of times that treatment, you need to lock them up because they've had their chance. And I think as a judge, you have to identify who you can help and who you can't help, and maybe who you need to protect the public from. So that's the job of criminal justice, deciding who needs help and who needs to be protected, maybe from themselves or from others. But I'm a proponent of medically assisted treatment. We're not doing enough of that. We're not using enough buprenorphine and Vivitrol. There's some people that could really benefit from that in this community, and that goes back to resources. There aren't a lot of resources for rehab. But other than that, it's just giving everybody a fair shake. And as far as background and being sympathetic, I think I'm the only candidate that was a prior public defender. I've represented. I'm out of time.
Thank you. And Mr. Page?
Of course, the disadvantage of going last is I'll sound maybe a little bit like the others, but I would agree with the rest of the panel with respect to their thoughts that the greatest challenge comes out of the criminal law aspect, and I feel the same way. I met with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, some of the attorneys there today, and my concern is the way that our current system is set up for the criminal defendant. Your 2 options, assuming you get a conviction or assuming that they plead guilty, are either parole or a conviction, and then with a conviction, obviously sentencing, in other words, imprisonment. And neither of those solutions seem to resolve the issue that puts the person before you in the first place. If they get out, as opposed to being in prison, they're more likely than not to have a recurrence, whereas if they go to prison, they're not they're just spending time. In other words, again, there's no solutions there. So I'm interested in exploring a way to reach a middle ground where the people that come before me that are guilty of crimes, that we can come up with some sort of solution so that we don't have criminal defendants that are just on a rotating basis back and forth and back and forth. So that's something that I'm very interested in exploring with the prosecutor's office and hopefully finding some sort of middle ground that would be curative.
Thank you. Moving to our next question, and Ms. Goodman, you'll have this first. And the question has to do with your opinion on the citizenship question that is being proposed for inclusion in the census survey.
I think the census survey deals with our communities and the size of the communities and how much the resources will then be given to each community. So my concern is if we do the citizenship, then communities that have a great deal of individuals who are not citizens will not be counted. And then the people that have the states like California or different areas where we have a lot of immigrants or individuals there will end up not getting the resources they need. I worry that handling a situation like that by not counting every single individual that lives in the community, that we will be depriving communities that need the most resources the ones that they need. And so I don't see any real reason for them to do it, but at the end of the day, it's up to the legislators. I think the only thing citizens can do is give their voice, have them be heard, but it's not for judges to make those decisions. It'll be up for the legislators as to whether or not they will allow that go through, and then maybe eventually it'll get to the judges to decide if it's constitutional. But it won't be a circuit judge. I can assure you of that. It'll be a federal district or Supreme Court judge. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stadler.
Thank you. What this question brings up to me are the people that I see as a prosecutor in criminal court who are not citizens here in this country, but yet we still, they get arrested for whatever charge and end up appearing before the court. And I'll tell you, in dealing with defense attorneys and sitting across from them and trying to negotiate offers and determine what the sentence is going to be, we routinely have to address issues regarding immigration, and we have to address issues regarding their status in this country. And the question they're talking about putting on the census, I believe would have a chilling effect upon those individuals, in that they will be less likely to want to participate in that census. And I think it's very important for our communities that we get an accurate count of those individuals. I know we have a number of them here in Fayette County, and through various community activities that I've been involved in, they fear the government. And so the question, I think, will be one that will cause them not to be counted. And on that basis, I believe that it's something that shouldn't be included. But again, that's something for the federal courts, not the state courts, to decide.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you. As a sitting judge, I'm going to ignore the policy question a little bit, because I don't know that I should be commenting on that. And I think it is probably going to be a federal question of law. But, you know, the Hispanic community in Lexington has a great effect on our criminal justice system. And when I was representing Hispanics that were non-citizens, it was very tough in the criminal justice system, because what would happen is they would be arrested, they would make bond, and then they would get an ICE holder. And ICE would come and take them, and they'd go to northern Kentucky, and the case would just stall. So you would have cases that just weren't going anywhere because your client was in northern Kentucky. You didn't know if or when he was coming back. And frankly, there's a dozen at least cases in front of me right now that we're just waiting on ICE to decide if they're going to give them a bond at the federal level and let them come back, or if they're just going to ship them off and we're just going to end up dismissing the case because we have no body to prosecute, because the Commonwealth Attorney won't issue a writ to get them back to court. So it has a great effect on this community. The last thing I'll say is last summer I did a ride-along with the Lexington Police Department when I was serving as Division III judge, and we did that in Cardinal Hill, and Cardinal Valley, and I can tell you that community lacks resources and needs resources. So it's a very important issue.
Thank you. Mr. Page?
I'm also concerned about getting into issues that might possibly be presented before the court. But so the census, obviously, you want to know the number of people in your community because those numbers have a bearing on resources that are made available. And I am concerned about the chilling effect that was referenced already. If people are concerned that being identified as citizens or not citizens could have them put in legal jeopardy, they're going to avoid being counted, and it's going to alter and skew the numbers that are the actual numbers that we're dealing with as citizens of Lexington. So I have concerns about making that a requirement of the census. So.
Thank you. And Mr. Todd?
My wife ought to answer this question. She's worked in the last 2 censuses, I would say. And she's sitting over there with Gary Howard. I do think that it would be a chilling effect to ask that question. Citizens from other countries, immigrants, be they legal or illegal, simply are a part of every community. They affect how many people are in the school. I know when my daughter went to Dunbar High School, this is urban legend, but I was told that many of the Hispanic parents from Cardinal Valley would just show up the first day of school and just drop their kids off at the front door without registering or anything, and they would show up 50 or 100 people, and some of these young people couldn't even speak English. Immigrants are going to be legal or illegal, are going to be in our judicial system. I can tell you I've spent much of my career, latter part of my career, representing construction companies. You're not going to get a house built, you're not going to get a roof put on in this community or any community without immigrants. And I think that the point of the census is how many people are in this community or in the country at any given time. We can talk about citizenship or non-citizenship at a later date, but the point is we need an accurate count. I know when Jennifer was running the survey out in Beaumont where we lived, she was told by an American, well, I'm not going to answer those questions, it's unconstitutional. She's like, no, actually it is in the Constitution. Every 10 years has been since 1790. So I definitely do not think that question should be on there.
Thank you. So, Mr. Stadler, this one will go to you first. As a judge, do you or will you make decisions based on facts or on your moral beliefs?
I believe as a judge, you make decisions based on the law, and you apply the law to the facts. That's really the essence of being a judge and the most important piece of it. I believe that a judge should interpret things based on the reasonable interpretation of the text. You look at the text of the statute or the text of the contract and see what those words reasonably mean. And that is how you should then apply those to the facts that appear before you. You shouldn't prejudge any facts before they come before the court, and your moral beliefs are part of that, which would be sort of prejudging the matter before it comes before the court. Under the law, there really should be one answer to the question, and you should apply the law to the facts and reach that result. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds?
I'll just be very brief. You do not make decisions based upon your morals. There's a rule of law. Sometimes you have to decide facts if you're having a bench trial, or you have to interpret some facts. But other than that, that's a very simple answer. You do not make decisions based upon your morals.
Thank you. Mr. Page?
I would agree with Mr. Reynolds, Judge Reynolds, 100% on that. You decide cases based on the law and the facts that are presented to you, and you apply those facts to the law. You don't apply your own personal moral code. We are charged as circuit court judges to follow the law, to follow the precedent, and those are our touchstones, and that's it.
Thank you. And Mr. Todd?
I won't add a whole lot to what the rest of them have said because I basically agree with them. I might go one step further, and I know when I went through the nominating process, I was asked sort of a similar question, and my thought is, if a judge has such a strong moral objection to a particular law or a particular rule of law that's been followed, then, I think they should just take the robe off and go get a job that they don't have such a moral objection to. There's nothing wrong with that. We all can see certain instances, but I 100% agree. If the law is X, then my personal opinion as to whether that's a good law or not really shouldn't come into it. I think my job is to enforce X.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Goodman.
Yes. As a district judge for the last 11 years, I've had many jury trial cases as well as bench trials. I can assure you that in every one of those cases, it was my responsibility to follow the law. I cannot bring my moral beliefs into it. That's when I put the robe on, I take an oath that I will assure everyone that I will abide by the law and I'll follow it. Every time I have a jury trial, I tell the jurors, you may not agree with the law, but you can't change it while you're in the jury box. I may not agree with some laws that our legislators pass, but when I put the robe on and sit on the bench, I am bound to follow that law, and I do follow it on a regular basis. I follow the same advice I give to the jurors every time as I have done for the last 11 years. Thanks.
Thank you. And Mr. Reynolds, this next question will start with you. Outside of your professional duties, what other contributions do you make for the betterment of our community?
So there's two organizations that I'm very proud to be involved in. One is the Knights of Columbus at Christ the King. That's a charitable organization. All the money we raise, we give to various charities throughout the Catholic diocese and actually abroad too. We've given money to some organizations, Mustard Seed and different organizations in Jamaica and South America. The other group, and I would encourage everyone to look this group up, it's called Be That Person, and they started last August. And what it is they take a class of, and it's largely African American youth. I think they started with 14 and they're down to 8 now. And it's a life skill class. It lasts all year long. They start in August and they're going to graduate in July. And they apply for it, they get a scholarship, and they actually, if they complete it, they get a stipend. Each month they do a different skill. So one month they talk about, just simple things like banking and finance. Next month they talk about health and hygiene. The next month, they're going to talk about law and the justice system and careers. It's a really great organization, and I'm proud to be associated with them because I think they're just going to they just started, but they're doing great things in this community. Be that person.
Thank you. Mr. Page?
So I've always understood the importance in my career of giving back to the community. Early in my career, I was involved with my high school alumni association, but then when our son was about 4 or 5, he was diagnosed with autism. And that was a sea change. It still gets me a little emotional, even so. It's actually the only thing that gets me emotional when I'm speaking. It was a sea change to my life and to my wife's life. And since then, we have devoted all of our spare time to supporting disability causes, and in particular the Autism Society of the Bluegrass. My wife's been the president of that organization, and I've been the treasurer of that organization for about 15 years. And so we support their annual walk, we do monthly meetings, we do other things, and that pretty much is what we devote our spare time to, is the Autism Society of the Bluegrass.
Thank you. How about you, Mr. Todd?
Thank you. Currently, I only serve on one board, and I'll be honest with you, serving on boards is not something that I do on a regular basis. I would much rather be a doer. And let me tell you what I've done. I am on the board of the High Street YMCA, but I've also been appointed to a special committee that's trying to redevelop the High Street YMCA. I would much rather take on projects like I have done pro bono in the recent past. CASA is the court-appointed special advocates group that represents children in the court system. They were looking for a new office building, and I volunteered my time and pro bono represented CASA to obtain a new office building earlier this year. A couple years ago, I represented Embrace Church on North Limestone. It's in the 1000 block. They were a small church. They called me. They said, "No, we've got money. We can pay you." I was like, "You're not going to pay me." They had a problem with their developer next door. We worked through it and spent a great deal of time working for Embrace Church. I'm very happy to say that development is up and running now. I've devoted some time to the home for Amaya. It's out off Russell Cave Road, a young girl you all probably read about that was shot in a drive-by shooting in the Building Industry Association of Kentucky. I'm proud to say, which I was a member of. built her a house, and I did some legal work to get the deed and the title work done. And then I represented the Liberty Road Faith Fellowship in their merger with another church. Didn't charge them anything either. And that's the kind of thing, I think that's important as an attorney. I want to use my skills to do something, and I think that's what suits me, is to do things like that for pro bono. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Goodman?
Yes. I've always tried to be a part of this community. Probably the thing that I spend the most time doing is I am on the Board of Trustees at Transylvania University. I'm also a mentor for the 100 Doors program to mentor a young woman. I think I picked Transylvania because while I came from a great family, it wasn't an educated-oriented family, and my older sister and I both went to Transy on scholarships, and that's where I found my voice. That's where I found the mentor that told me I, as a woman, could be anything I wanted to be. So I give back to Transylvania a great deal. I've also been on the Shriners Board Corporate Council to help build a garden for the young children that stay at Shriners at the new hospital. And additionally, I have done the Newman Foundation. I was the president of the Newman Foundation as well as on the board for several years. But the thing I probably do the most for the community right now is not part of my job. It is a volunteer role, and that's as a drug court judge. It is not respected. It's only volunteer. It's not part of the profession. But I think that the opiate addiction in this community is absolutely destroying our young people. And I've been fortunate enough to be in a position where I could take on a drug court. And so I think between Transylvania and drug court, I do spend a lot of trying to give back.
Thank you. And Mr. Stadler?
Thank you. I currently serve on the Fayette County Bar Association Board, the Lexington Dream Factory Board, and on the Leadership Lexington Steering Committee. I've previously been the board chair for Sunflower Kids, which is a supervised visitation center here in Lexington, and worked to make sure that those services continued in our community. I've done a number of community activities. I've been involved with the Credit Abuse Resistance Education Program, which is a program where lawyers go into high schools and speak to high school juniors and seniors about credit and their responsibilities under the law. When I was in Leadership Lexington, our project was called On the Table, which is a community-wide conversations. I'm a member of the Lexington Rotary Club. In the past, I've been a Habitat for Humanity ambassador. But really what I guess, in getting back to the question, the thing that I think of is I was a reading tutor at the Carnegie Center, and the individual that I got paired up with was someone who his father I had prosecuted, and I prosecuted his father in child support and in regular misdemeanor court, and that was really when it hit home to me the importance of being involved in the community, not just as a prosecutor in your profession, but in your personal life. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this next question, we're going to start with Mr. Page, and I'm just going to tell you it's a long, complicated question. It's about the crime rate, and I'm going to simplify it a little bit. Many people believe that crime is increasing in Fayette County, yet between 2010 and 2017, based on AOC data, circuit court cases have declined, district court misdemeanor cases have declined, and DUI cases in district court have declined, and I have the numbers here. Yet incarceration costs continue to increase. What do you recommend to safely reduce incarceration costs?
Well, actually, I touched on that at the start. As I mentioned in my discussion with the prosecutor's office today, I think that there needs to be an exploration of another form of resolution to criminal offenses other than giving the criminal defendant a prison sentence or giving them probation, because as I understand and as I've talked to some people in the know, neither of those are particularly effective in preventing recurrence of criminal activity. So I hope to, if I'm successful in this race, discuss with my fellow circuit judges and look into other ways that we can resolve criminal offenses without just giving those two choices. And I'm not quite sure what the solution is. When I was at one example I give, when I was at Transy on the judicial board, and I was a Transy student, I would give the students an assignment of an essay as opposed to the basic punishments, because that forced them to learn the student code, and it really discouraged them from wanting to violate the student code again. So obviously that's not the same as what we're dealing with here, but there are other alternatives than the ones that we've been presented so far.
Thank you. Mr. Todd?
Well, one easy step they could do in the state legislature, which we don't have the right to do, is they could decriminalize what I consider fairly minor drug offenses like marijuana possession, which I understand from what I read in the paper the other day, African Americans are 6 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than Caucasians, which that can't be just. That can't be right. But beyond that, I certainly support the federal movement, and I'm not sure I'm going to get these reversed. The First Step Act, which is actually a reenactment of the Second Chance Act, which tries to lower and get people off of the prison course and back into society by changing some of the sentencing laws for drug possession. I know the local Commonwealth Attorney's Office has the Deter program they're starting to work. Judge Tapp down in Somerset started the Smart Court, which I'm trying to educate myself to learn the various aspects of these programs. I support all of that. I think that it's great that crime is going down. I think what most people are really worried about is the ones that hit the headlines, the murders and the serious assaults and those type of things. But the vast majority, that's not what you're really facing. And I do support those type of programs.
Thank you. Ms. Goodman?
Yes, for the last 11 years, I handle a felony docket and a misdemeanor docket. Today was my felony docket and misdemeanor. I had 39 felonies, and I had 85 misdemeanors. The numbers are growing. They've been growing in Fayette County. But what we're trying to do, in the way that maybe it looks as if they're going down, is we have a diversion program. If you get a possession of marijuana, you're going to a diversion program. You're not going to be incarcerated. We work regularly with the county attorney's office to find ways to help the young people. What I will tell you, though, is while we're figuring out ways how to handle the minor crimes through diversion, through probation, through things like that, what we're not figuring out how to handle, and why our numbers seem to be growing in that we have people in our jails, are because we don't have the resources to handle and to house our homeless, our mentally ill, and our drug addicts. So we consistently, those numbers continue to rise and rise. In the 11 years, the amount of crime that I've seen occur has increased, but it's increased in possession of drugs, or the use of drugs, or the trafficking of drugs. It doesn't seem to be as much the serious crimes. So until we deal with the opiate addictions, until we deal with our homeless problem and our mentally ill problem, I think we're going to continue to have those problems and those numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stadler?
Thank you. I think and getting to the question of what we can safely do to reduce incarceration costs, I think part of that is really a function of the legislator and not so much of the courts. As it's been explained to me through our community partners, the issue really is that we don't have enough beds for treatment out there. And while crime may be decreasing, we're losing people to the opioid epidemic in our community. And as a prosecutor, I've seen the majority of crime we have is somehow drug-related, whether it's direct possession of drugs or a burglary in order to get items to sell for drugs, things like that. And our community will always have a certain segment of violent crime, but the opioid epidemic is something that we could actually address and do something with. And so I've been working with an organization called Spark, which is advocating for a full-time Casey's Law advocate here in Fayette County. And Casey's Law is a guardianship proceeding where individuals can come in and essentially have a drug-addicted person be declared incompetent so that they can then be forced to go to inpatient treatment. And so I believe there are alternatives, and there are things that we can do in our community in working with organizations such as Spark in order to accomplish those goals and reduce incarceration costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you. Well, this is a topic that I could probably speak for an hour about because it's just so important. I don't think people understand the power that the Commonwealth Attorney has in the criminal justice system. As a circuit judge, you cannot dismiss a criminal case. Only the Commonwealth attorney can move to dismiss a case. Okay, they have all the power of plea negotiations. So as a judge, the case comes to you and they've already worked out a plea. You either accept it or you deny it, and you would rarely have reason to deny it. Last year I had a case, somebody was killed. It was a murder case, and it was amended down to assault fourth, and the guy was pleading to 12 months in jail. And I asked him to approach the bench, and I said, how is it that we have somebody that died, and this is a violent person that is going to admit that he did this, but you're going to give him a misdemeanor? And the reasoning was the Commonwealth didn't have the witnesses to prosecute the case, so that was their decision. That wouldn't have been my decision as a Commonwealth attorney, but that's what they wanted to do, and there was no reason to deny it because it was appropriate for them to negotiate that under the circumstances. But people don't realize how much power the Commonwealth attorney has in making these decisions. So it depends on who's in that office, how those deals are made, and it also depends on the history of the people that are in front of you.
Thank you. Okay, and Mr. Todd, this will be to you first. Since you graduated from law school, is there a body of law on which your perspective has changed based on your experience? Please explain.
I think that my perspective on litigation has changed, I would say, in general. When I first started practicing law in 1985, people tried cases all the time. They used to joke at Stites and Harbus, and John Famularo gave the same opening statement every single case because he'd done so many of them, he just kind of changed the names. I think I read just recently that in maybe 2017 there were only 93 civil cases tried in Kentucky. I just tried one for 5 days in October that was just, or a couple of Octobers ago, was just affirmed by the Kentucky Court of Appeals in front of Judge Goodwine. The litigation has really gotten so much more expensive that I've become very reluctant to advise clients to go all the way to trial unless it's absolutely essential, because as the saying goes, you're almost sometimes beat before you get to the courthouse. You've spent so much money litigating in the civil arena that by the end of it, everybody's just exhausted and they get tired and quit. So I would say that has changed my perspective in the 34 years I've been practicing.
Thank you. Ms. Goodman?
I think, to be honest, when we get out of law school, we don't have a good grasp of what a body of law is. We're not taught how to be lawyers. We're taught about cases. We live in an ivory tower. I think what I've seen over the last 40 years as a lawyer is, I think what our laws have become is they've become laws that have become too complicated, even sometimes for the lawyers. I think we've also made the laws such that, especially in the criminal setting, that we don't have the resources to make sure we have good trial lawyers to defend the individuals. So I don't think that a body of law has changed, or my opinion of any bodies of law have changed. I think what my opinion has become is that the laws have become too complicated and that the legal system has become too expensive, and that your average person can't afford lawyers and can't receive the representation they need. As a district judge, I could tell you that I couldn't afford a lawyer based on what I am paid as a district judge, and I certainly couldn't have afforded me when I was in private practice. So I think what we've done is we've made a whole body of law that no one can take advantage of.
Thank you. Mr. Stadler?
Thank you. I would say it's not one particular body of law. I guess it's the entire law, really. When you come out of law school, you have an ideal of what litigation's going to be like, what the courtroom's going to be like, how cases are going to be decided. And then I went and worked for a circuit court judge and saw very quickly how the courtroom was very different from what I thought it would be in law school. And in law school, they teach you the basics of the law. But the real thing that has changed in my mind is how people are treated in a courtroom, and people are just not treated fairly. depending on who they are or their socioeconomic status. There are times, and I guess I want to be clear, there are times when they are treated fairly, but there are a number of times where, based on who their attorney is, based on the resources that they can go, whether they can pay for expert witnesses, whether they can pay for certain individuals to help make their case stronger or better, people are just treated differently in the courtroom. I guess that's the biggest change that I've seen since when I came out of law school.
Thank you. And Mr. Reynolds?
I'll just say my perspective on criminal law has changed over the last 22 years. I started off as a law clerk for a prosecutor, and then after I took the bar, became a lawyer for DPA, and I was on the other side of the equation, and then I became a judge. And it's a very sensitive subject. This goes back to the crime rate. When I was a judge, people were always talking about your probation rates, and once a month, the Fayette Circuit Court judges, all their probation versus sentencing rates get published on Facebook. And I would get these nasty comments that I was probating too many people. Well, the ignorance of that was that they didn't know if those were violent crimes, if those were first-time offenders, if they were property crimes, or they were murder cases. It's just, 67%, whatever, probated, the rest sentenced. So people really don't understand that, and they need to understand that, and they need to understand their perspective. Everybody wants to lock everybody up, but you just can't do that. And our Chief Justice Minton put out an order last year that required mandatory pretrial release. And that's really the problem with our system, is the lack of pretrial release. If you spend 3 days in jail, you're going to lose your job. Your family's going to be... I'm going to stop.
You do. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Page?
So I think my view on, it's kind of a broad question, but I think my view on perhaps constitutional law has changed, because coming out of law school, you study lots of Supreme Court opinions and you take them at face value. But over the last 30, 35 years, you start to realize that the way that our Constitution is interpreted depends upon who our leaders are and who our leaders place in a position to interpret that Constitution. And so we have seen over the last 30, 35 years that the Constitution isn't necessarily black and white. It is interpreted by a group of justices that don't agree always, and will have varying and different opinions on that. And it highlights the importance to me of voting, because even at this level, you're selecting a circuit court judge, but your leaders are responsible for selecting all your judges, and those judges ultimately have a say in the laws that affect all of us.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry to say we only have time for one more question. I'm really enjoying your all's answers. And for this one, we'll begin with Ms. Goodman. We're going to go a little philosophical here. Please name a judge, living or deceased, that you most admire and explain why.
Well, I think this would be pretty obvious to most people in this room. It would be Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The reason I feel that way is when I went to law school, there were very few women in law school. When I got out, I knew immediately I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I always wanted to be a trial lawyer. I went to an older gentleman when Ray Larson asked if I wanted to be in special prosecutions, and he says, "Oh, you can't take that job because women don't belong in the courtroom." Well, that's changed. But if I'd listened to him, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had listened, then I wouldn't be up here asking people to vote for me for circuit court. I wouldn't have sat on the bench for 11 years as a district judge. I wouldn't have tried cases in 24 states, and I wouldn't have tried cases in 20 counties. I would not have done what I love every day, which is be a judge and have worked every day in the courtroom. And I think that the person that had helped open the door for that, who had become the icon for most women, lawyers and judges, would be Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Thank you. Mr. Stadler?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go a different route, I guess. The person for me, it wouldn't be a U.S. Supreme Court justice. It would be Justice Jim Keller, and that he was, I only met him a few times, but I know from his reputation in this community and the connection that he had as a trial court judge and then as a Kentucky Supreme Court judge, he really set the example of what a judge should be and how they should act. He was a true gentleman and was connected to this community in a way that other people just are not. And so if there's one person that I would say, it would be Jim Keller.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds?
So, one of the first judge that had a really big effect on me in my career was Judge Julia Tackett when she was on the district court bench. I was an intern at UK in the late 90s, and we were over in the old building on Martin Luther King. And I've told this story to John before, John Tackett, her son. As an intern, a lot of the judges over there at the time, they wouldn't, there's really not much to legal, writing or anything going on in district court. It's usually pretty routine. But Judge Tackett took an interest in me, and she made sure that I was involved every day that I was there. And she had a civil case. It was at the time, I think the limit was $2,500, maybe less. But anyway, it was just a little civil case. And Judge Tackett let me research and write the opinion for her. And she didn't have to do that. She could have written it in a few sentences or a page and done it, and it would have been fine. But she gave me that opportunity to research it and to write it for her. And I remember I gave it to her, and she didn't change a thing. And she said it looks good, and she signed it, and it made it in the record. And I was just so proud of that event. It was just a small thing, but I remember it very fondly.
Thank you. Mr. Page?
I, too, am going to speak on a local level. Over my career, I've appeared in perhaps as many as 75 circuit courts, and I've seen lots of circuit judges. But the first one, and I guess the one that left the initial impression on me, was a judge named David Knox. And the reason that he left such an impression on me was because when I would present a motion to him, whether it was a substantive motion or a more simple motion, I could rely upon Judge Knox not only reading the motion, reading the responses, reading the replies, getting a prompt response out, and more often than not, you would get a lengthy opinion. And those were opinions that I was used to getting from Court of Appeal judges, but it was unusual from a circuit court level for a judge to be so prepared and so ready to devote his time to giving my client and the other side's client his full concentration and full answer. Since then, I've had other judges. I appreciate Judge Goodwine in the way that she has approached her bench. I could always count when I appeared before her, knowing that she, like Judge Knox, would have read the pleading and would have had a response prepared. She was willing to hear the parties, but I always could count on Judge Goodwine being ready, giving the full time that was required to that work. So those are the two that I'll cite. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Todd?
I'm going to cite two. One, because I'm a history buff. Oliver Wendell Holmes was severely wounded at Antietam in 1862, and they told his family up in New England he was dead. His dad came down from New England, found him on the battlefield at Antietam. He wasn't dead. Nursed him back to health. He managed to live through the Civil War, went to law school, or became a lawyer back then. I'm not sure they had law school. And 70 years later, he was still on the Supreme Court when Franklin Roosevelt took office. And I'm like, man, what a career resume that Justice had, 70 years of service. The other one I'll mention is I agree with Stephen Stadler. I knew Judge Keller. When I was a young attorney, Judge Keller intimidated the heck out of me. He was a big man. He came from Cranch Creek, Kentucky. And anybody that practiced in front of him, you'd go to court and he'd say, now, Mr. Todd, there's a case that says something. And being a young attorney, I'd run back to court, and by golly, he was right. There was a case that would say what he said. He ended up on the Kentucky Supreme Court, wrote some very, very influential decisions. I really respected Judge Keller, but I knew when I went to court in front of him, I better mind my P's and Q's because he's going to tell me there's a case, and I better know what it had to say.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, it is time to turn to closing remarks now, and the candidates did draw a second time for the order of closing remarks, so I'll just call on them in the order that they drew. And our first closing remark will come from Mr. Todd.
think I've probably summarized the experience that I bring to the table in far as my life experiences, and I've had a very broad practical experience in many areas of law. And I think being a practical-minded person is very important in being a judge. I alluded to earlier about, in my opinion, the extreme cost of litigation. Discovery alone can cost $50,000, $100,000 in a given case, more than a few times. And I'm proud to say I've done this. I've gone to private mediation without a mediator, no judge in the room, me and my client, the opposing party and their client, sometimes multiple parties. And we've worked out cases where, quite frankly, in a couple of occasions, I can tell you the parties literally despised one another. But we got it done. It was tough. And we agreed ahead of time nobody's going to walk out of there and say anything. It was all going to be confidential, but we got it done. I'm very proud that I saved thousands and thousands of dollars for my clients doing that. I'm a high-energy person. I'm very detail-oriented. I know that I will need to do some academic exercises to get the criminal justice system to understand it better, but I've already started doing that. I've been going down to criminal motion hour and trying to get my arms around the way the procedures work. And I think I've gotten a start on that. In summary, I guarantee you can rely on me to render fair decisions and to protect the public from dangerous criminals, but I will also try to show mercy when appropriate and when times when the circumstances warrant it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds, you're next.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's an honor to serve as your Fayette Circuit Court judge right now. For me, it's a job that I love, and I hope to be able to continue to do that. It's not my identity. It is a job, and it's our job to make sure that litigants receive a fair trial. And I'll just use the example from today. We finished up an 8-day medical malpractice trial, and speaking of cost, those are six-digit, six-figure costs for both sides. They're prohibitively expensive. And after 8 days, we had 2 doctors on one side, and we had a family with a very injured child on the other side. And that case had been going for 3 years. For 3 years, that family and those doctors' family, they have waited for this court. They've waited for this jury trial. And it's my job to make sure that everyone has a fair shake and everyone gets their day in court, and that trial goes smoothly, so that they have the right to get in front of a jury and have that jury decide the outcome of their case. So we all have a role to do in the courtroom. I recognize that, and I appreciate the opportunity to do it, and I hope that you'll vote for me on May 21st so that I can continue to serve as your Fayette Circuit Court judge. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Goodman?
First, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event, and then I want to thank everybody in the audience for coming and for caring enough to be informed about the decision. I also want to say that I've felt it has been an honor to be a district court judge for 11 years, and I was happy to hear people say things about Justice Keller, because I'm on the bench because of Justice Keller. He called me after I'd been a trial lawyer, and he said, "You've had a phenomenal career, but now you've got to give back." And he's the one that told me I had to run for district judge. I don't regret a minute of that. It has been the best position I've ever held. It's an honor to serve this community on a daily basis. But I don't think anybody is entitled to the position of judge, whether it's district or circuit. I think you have to earn it. I don't think you have a right to just say, "I want it." I don't think I would have ever run for district court if Judge Keller hadn't told me, "Yes, you've learned enough. You know how to practice law. You've been in circuit. You've been in district. Now it's time to take off your advocate hat and become a judge." I wouldn't run for this position if I didn't think after 11 years on the district court bench and all the cases I tried in circuit court and in district court that I wasn't ready. I think you have to earn it, and it would be an honor to serve as the circuit court judge. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stadler?
Thank you. Again, I would like to thank the League of Women Voters and the Lexington Public Library for this opportunity. My name is Stephen Stadler. I've dedicated my career, both professionally and personally, to service to this community. I believe I'm the best choice to be the next circuit court judge based upon my experience as a prosecutor, my community involvement, and my dedication to service here in Fayette County. Approximately 75% of the job a circuit court judge does is criminal in nature. I'm uniquely qualified for this position because I haven't spent my career in a big downtown law firm doing commercial defense work, but rather working for the citizens of Fayette County and advocating for the victims of crime. I've been on the front lines and prosecuted cases on every level, from local, state, and federal cases, and this experience will allow me to bring a fresh look and an open mind to the bench. I'm not interested in being a circuit court judge just for the next 3 years, but for the rest of my career. I've lived other places in my life, but there's no place I'd rather be than here in Lexington because of this community, and I hope that my connection to this community will be recognized and the voters will see that. So my name appears last on your ballot, so please skip to the end because they saved the best for last. And please vote Stephen Stadler on May 21st. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Page.
Thank you. The best candidate for this job is the one who's been actively engaged in litigation for a considerable period of time, as opposed to one who spent the majority of his or her career in some other capacity, other than as a trial attorney or practicing at a different level of court rather than circuit court. Absent a real depth of experience within the legal profession and absent considerable real-life experience on the circuit court level, I think the candidate will lack some of the necessary foundation to perform this role effectively. Per the criteria outlined in a recent Fayette County judicial bar poll, I believe I possess the requisite skill sets to constitute a good circuit judge. On the issue of legal ability, I am AV preeminent peer review rated by Martindale Hubbell. That's the highest peer review rating a practicing attorney can receive. I'm an equity member of the largest Lexington-based law firm in the state. Given my position as an equity member of my law firm, this is not a position I'm seeking as a means of improving my financial status. Rather, it is one I seek due to my long-standing interest in serving as a circuit judge in the Commonwealth. As a lifelong Lexington resident, I have an appreciation for this community and its citizens. I think I understand what Lexingtonians consider important to our city and what constitutes our local culture. I think our circuit judges play an important role in enforcing our local sense of justice and security, and I believe I am capable and qualified to provide the legal decisions that will contribute to that sense of justice going forward. I would ask for your vote on May 21. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, great forum. We'd like to thank our sponsors, the Lexington Public Library and the League of Women Voters of Lexington, and let's thank our candidates for participating. Didn't they do a spectacular job? Be sure to vote in the primary election on Tuesday, May 21st. Thank you all for joining us, and good evening.